Welcome to Honestly Speaking, a safe place to be unsafe. Life commentary and dialogue from a biblical, logical, cultural, and comical perspective.
Welcome back, folks. Happy Memorial Day. It's Honestly Speaking. We decided to do a pop-up show as per usual. How are you doing? Hopefully you have a community that you are pouring into and one that is pouring into you. Man, oh man, it has been wow. I see we have a couple of listeners. Please let us know where you're watching from and what's going on with you. Hopefully you are in the States, are enjoying Memorial Day. We are actually international today. We have my good friend, Sarah Enslin. I'm gonna introduce her in a second, but before we do what we do, you all know what it is. I'm your host, Honest-Leigh, and as per usual, we have Crystal Clear.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, that's right. Thank you, Coco, for tapping in. This is our, I want to say fourth Clear and Honest, where we talk about things. That's right. Enjoying from the office. Great. Where we talk about things from a Christian perspective that apply to everyone. And so, yeah, I thought about this today and I was just like, we were going to talk about foundations and things like that, but I really felt burdened in light of everything that's going on to kind of put it out there. And so I put it out there to Chris and she was with it, but then I put it out to my good friend, Sarah. Now, before I talk about anything on the topic, I'm just going to big Sarah up really quick because she doesn't big herself up. Okay. So Sarah Enslin is hailing in now from Mexico, folks, from Mexico, right? Give it up for Mexico, right? Right. She's hailing in from Mexico. She is a therapist. She is a missionary. She is a teacher. She's a lot of things to a lot of. She has a blanket for those. She has a blanket. Now, this, you want to talk about a flex. One day I stayed at her house and I was sleeping in the bed and I noticed this quilt, right? I'm like, what is this quilt? Her quilt was made of all of her jerseys, right? Of all of these teams that she had been on. And she's track star. So I'm like, what is going on, right? And she would be humble. I'm not really a track star. I only broke a couple records. I only hold a couple records at my old college, whatever. She's banging to me, right? So I'm like, oh my goodness. And then she says, oh, those are just my spare ones. Like and she wasn't being braggadocious. She was legitimately like, oh yeah, those are the extra, those aren't the important ones to me. These are just the spare ones. So I'm very blessed to have Sarah. We've known each other for years now. Well over a decade, going on
2008.
Yeah. It's been a long time since I've known her, folks. And so, Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself or say anything?
Sure. So I don't know what I would add to that, but yeah, I love people and I am living in Mexico training people how to do counseling for free. And I work online counseling people to pay the bills here. I live very cheaply. And I also, something you didn't mention is I like to rescue dogs. I just actually rescued another one today. I didn't tell you.
Yeah, she's like the dog rescuer, okay? I'm sure there's like Bible verses about being kind to animals and stuff like that. Well, crowns in heaven, because she's adopted a dog, and then now she has other dogs she's taking care of. Man, listen, great. So that is Sarah, and we were thinking about talking about a number of things, and like I said before, He says, now I get it. That's right. That's Coco, because I talk to him about you often. Man, it's an understatement, the things that she's involved in, right? So we were discussing, in light of everything that's been going on in the world. Uh, Crystal Clear said something on the last live. She said, people aren't grieving well. And I thought about it and I was like, yeah, it made me think of like what it means to grieve. So, Crystal Clear, did you want to talk a little bit about that before we kind of get into the flow of everything?
Sure. Uh, I probably about 2007 started really. I think that was probably one of the seasons where I really focused on what grief is and doing it well, and um, the questions that come up, especially as a Christian, um, conversations that I needed to have with the Lord, and and also parenting a grieving child and helping him process all of that. Um, it was really helpful to be intentional about it. Like I remember, um, personally, I lost my sister in 2007, and I remember praying the night after she died and just asking God to help me to grieve well and not become overcome by a spirit of grief. Um, and really held on to that throughout that grieving process. It was very intentional. In addition to having a therapist, I read lots of books. I talked to people about, where I was and what I was going through. But I think that opened up a door for me, a perspective of how much there really is to grieve and how society doesn't really embrace that process. Fast forward to a year ago, someone very close to us passed away, and I was reading a book, actually listening to a seminar, and the gentleman was stating how we rush grief. Um, and he said if you don't think we rush grief, look at the standard amount of days off given to a spouse who loses a spouse. And he used that as a reference because of how close spouses are. And on average, they get 2 days, um, 2 days off, which is unimaginable. After 2 days, you might be eating and drinking. Like, just the idea that you're supposed to go back to work and function. People losing children, not being able to go back to a normal life, which kind of just started this process all over again for me. Um, and yeah, so in that process, I my eyes became more open to how much grief surrounds us, even if we don't suffer traumatic losses, and how little energy we give to the things that are sorrowful. Um, how the world is not as it should be, and yeah, and I've just been kind of sitting there. So when the incident happened last week, well, the incidents over the last few weeks, um, as I look at the news and you have conversations with people, everyone's kind of talking, like moving on to the next thing. Like what went wrong? What can we do? How can we fix it? And don't get me wrong, those are really great places to go, but I don't think we should skip the season before that. I think there's a season before that of just sorrow and lamenting and acceptance that we don't embrace well. For whatever reason, I don't know why, but we don't embrace it well, and we skip ahead to the doing and the action. And I wonder if we did the sorrow well, would we make some of the decisions and the actions that we make if we really sat with our pain and we really sat with our grief and we allowed, um, especially as believers, we allowed space for God to minister to us and to help us to know better what those steps should be, what those actions should be. So, yeah, that's my reason for saying I don't think we grieve well.
Right. And Coco even responded, yeah, we definitely rush grief. But before we talk about what grief is and how um, it impacts us, I want to just uh, define it instead of us just kind of assuming a definition. A lot of times when we think of grief, we think of like an emotional response to loss. I'm going to actually, and that is the definition, but I'm going to actually read it from like the APA dictionary because I think it impacts us on several levels. And then I'm going to have Sarah like talk a bit more about what happens when we grieve, what happens in our bodies and things like that. Hey, grace and peace, good bro. Grace and peace. Harrison Family Values. Check out that brother's channel. I know it's not a lot of people on tonight, and I honestly didn't expect it for it to be a lot of people tonight. I think that people are out barbecuing and trying to process and cope the way that they tend to cope today. Tends to be like the official mark of the beginning of the summer for a lot of people, and it brings a lot of emotions, a lot of angst. If you're somewhere where the murder rate is high, like in Philadelphia, it brings a lot of things on. So what we wanted to do today is just talk a bit about self-care in light of loss and grief, and how to be healthy and how to actually cope and grieve well. So as I was saying, I'm going to get into the psychological definition, the APA definition of what grief is. And it states that grief is a powerful emotional and physiological reaction to the loss of someone or something. It is characterized by deep sadness, sorrow, and often yearning or longing to be with the person or thing again. I also would say grief includes a numbness. Grief can often include a lot of anger. And to grieve is actually a part of self-care. I'm going to say that again. To grieve is actually a part of self-care. I think a lot of times when we think of self-care, we think of things that just make us feel good. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but I just wanted to say this now. Part of the reason why we're having this is so that we can have the plan now so that it can kind of be put into our memory banks and we can have something to draw from when we have to grieve or as we are grieving as a nation, as a world, and individually. So like Crystal and myself already said, we've had several losses. Anybody who knows me knows that I was actually, to be completely transparent, even afraid to talk about this topic because I felt like, oh God, if I bring this up and someone else dies, I can't. I can't. So, but I don't have to fear. I don't have to fear death. And I'm not saying that in a braggadocious way. I am actually saying that clinging to the cross as I say that. And in all honesty, I don't want to have to grieve anymore. My heart is breaking and is broken enough. However, life throws things at you. God's sovereignty allows certain things. So, with that having been said, in light of the definition that I stated that grief was, Sarah, could you do us a favor and just talk about what happens in our body when we grieve, like chemically and even physiologically?
Sure, yeah, and something I was thinking about even as, Crystal was sharing about, the two events you didn't mention specifically, but both of which were shootings in the past 2 weeks. That makes things even more complicated because then you're talking about adding PTSD to grief, especially for the people who were there, who were a part of what happened. But then even for those of us who weren't there, who maybe have had a similar experience, or maybe it didn't happen to us, but it happened to somebody that we know, because there's also vicarious trauma that we can experience, right? So any type of violence or traumatic events adds a whole nother element to grief because there's a deeper impact on our bodies, basically. Sorry, I'm just reading what was said. We can't hear you, Leigh.
Did you want me to read it?
Sure.
Coco put a quote in light of what we were just saying and in light of everything you just said.
Mhm.
As far as we don't process grief,
Yeah.
it's a quote from Kendrick Lamar's latest album. I think this is from his latest album. Correct me if I'm wrong, Coco. It says his mama died. I asked why he going back to work so soon. His reply was, "Son, that's life. Bills got no silver soon." So yeah, Kendrick
Mhm.
Lamar. So yeah, we people, to Crystal's point, the 2 days, to what you said, having to process and possibly having some type of post-traumatic or even acute trauma as a
Right.
result. But
Right.
anyway, go ahead. What's going
Yeah,
on in your
so basically really setting PTSD aside, which is basically just even more intense symptoms that have specific triggers from the environment. But when we're grieving, we're having an increased amounts of cortisol and adrenaline inserted into our body, which is stress hormones, right? So all of that's getting flooded into our body. That's why sometimes for some people, I remember my aunt, she lost her son and she literally could not get warm. She was freezing cold. They were heaping blankets on top of her and she couldn't get warm because her body, that was her body's response. So our body literally has physiological responses to death, to losses in our life. There's so many different options of what loss can be. There can be economic losses. There's so many different types of losses, and there literally is a physiological impact on our body. And another thing to consider is also depending on what stage of grief you're in. Not considering stages as a linear type of stage, because it's not. It's somebody could start off with anger, somebody else could start off with deep depression and sadness. Somebody else could start off with numbness and denial, right? So based off of which area of grief that you're in would also then impact how your body is being impacted. Because when you are depressed, you tend to be moving more slowly. You're going to probably be crying a lot more, not be able to do things. Maybe you aren't able to go to work, and you're having to use all your sick leave, right? If you're angry, maybe you are getting into fights in your relationships. Your body is feeling a lot of energy, and on edge, right? If you're numb, you could feel nothing. You could seem insensitive. Your body could literally be numb in and of itself, but obviously your emotions could be numb as well. So basically, your body is having chemical, physiological changes that is so important for those things to be processed, but also to accept. That's another very important thing. One is noticing, oh, this is what's happening in my body, and this is how it connects to how I'm feeling and what I'm thinking about the loss. So that self-awareness, and then accepting, okay, this is where I am right now. It's not better to be depressed, nor angry, nor numb. It's just, this is where you are. So accepting where you are, being aware of how it's impacting your body, how it's impacting your feelings, and take the time to process that with people, journaling, by whatever means that you need. And I think also then taking steps to care for your body. Taking steps, maybe if you're angry and you have a lot of energy, you need to go for runs and do a lot of exercise. Maybe if you're depressed, you also need to force yourself and go to run, but for a different reason. Maybe you also need to do some relaxation exercises if you're angry. So sometimes what you're going to do to help yourself can be the same, whether you're feeling angry or depressed, but it could be for different reasons, essentially. So maybe if you're depressed, you need to get out and actually be with people and talk about your feelings, rather than isolating, because isolating is just going to make depression worse. So that's just very brief description. I don't know if that's enough of what you were looking for, but that's what initially comes to my mind.
Yeah, how do both of you feel like, and even those in the chat, if you've ever experienced grief? Now remember, grief is the response to a loss, right? And she just talked about how it's psychological, but it's also physiological, right? So how those who are watching, please feel brave enough to put how you and your body, what happens in your body when you experience grief, or what happens in your mind. And also, let me just say this. this subject could be heavy. It could be heavy for us. Like, even as I'm thinking about it, like, so if at any point I may need to step off, I'm giving even a panel position permission to give themselves permission to kind of step away for a second, because this can be heavy.
Well, and even as you said that, Leigh, I think something that is important is it made me connect with myself. Like when you said that, I was like, oh, right, that's right. This is impactful to me, because I'm here thinking, oh, like we're talking to help other people. And I took a deep breath. So I went, oh, that's right. So I connected with my body. I realized, oh, my body is feeling stressed right now. And then the deep breath is a release of some of the stress.
Okay. Yeah. So for you, it's connecting your thoughts, and then you took a deep breath. And Cole, I see your question. We're actually going to come back to this question in just a second. Chris, did you want to go, or did you want me to go? You're muted still.
Sorry, I was having a little technical difficulty. Yeah, so your question, can you remind me one more time? I took a deep breath. Sorry. Go
So the
ahead.
question was, what happens when in you physiologically, either emotionally or mentally, when you are in a place of grief?
Right. So for me, if I'm being honest, it depends on the type of grief. It depends on like the reason why I'm grieving. Um, I will. I can say that I'm currently in a very unique season of grief. Um, it's probably the worst I've ever had. Um, but I would say that typically I do get a little um, anxious. Uh, um, I I will, if it's a traumatic loss, if it is um, meaning someone dies or uh, close to me, I typically kind of lose my breath in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I remember the most recent loss. I I go into this mode of secure the parameters. Like I need to make sure that the most vulnerable, which are my kids or children or whoever else might be younger, are secure and like taken care of before I accept the information. So like um yeah, like I will make sure that things are what they need to be, and then I need to get alone and I need to get quiet. And that's typically when I start to kind of have the anxiety. Um and I tend to feel it um the last time I had a friend ask me, "Where do you feel it?" Um and I think it was you. I think it was you, Lee. Where do you feel it at? And I tend to feel it mostly in my chest. Um, it affects my breathing. Uh, I'll get palpitations sometimes. Um, it's mostly just this ache. Like sometimes, like I'll literally physically like feel pain, like an ache.
Right.
Um, yeah, yeah, that's what I would say. Like the feeling. Um, Sometimes it can literally take my breath away. Like I think people have to remind me you can breathe. Like even though you feel like you can't, you can. So
Right. So for me, again, I think what Coco said that like can determine exactly how we grieve, because if I'm depending on what I grieve to what Sarah said determines kind of the type of grief that I'm going to have. So if it's a permanent grief on this side of eternity, um, my grief can look different for a number of reasons. If the person was not a Christian, the way that I grieve is very, very, very different than if they were a Christian. That's something that a lot of Christians is funny. I remember asking a pastor, like, how do you grieve someone who's not a Christian? And he legitimately didn't have an answer. Then I asked a bunch of other pastors and they didn't have an answer for it. And so it sent me on a journey to grieve. And so what happens in my body is I honestly don't know initially, because what my mind does is it disassociates really fast. I automatically go into worker mode. Who needs help? What's going on? What do I have to do? Boom. Sometimes I freeze. I think the time when the young lady that Crystal spoke about passed away was the first time in real time I grieved the first time I heard something. And I remember and I was at another funeral for a family member and in California. And I just called my mom. And I didn't need, so the way that grief works is, I love the question, but here's the thing. You don't really know how you're going to respond to grief until it hits you. So all of this talking that we're doing is so that we can have a bag of things that we can relate to or go to when we start to grieve, to know, oh, I'm not tripping. Let me be the first person to tell you, you're not tripping. You're not going crazy for the anger you feel, the bewilderment, the sense of loss, what you feel in your body. Sometimes my hands get hot, my arms start sweating. Sometimes I call them like spiritual panic attacks. It's almost like, what is real? What is life? In my next, the thoughts that go through my head. Sometimes I'm like, dag, I should have called them again. Sometimes there are those regrets. And so these are emotions that come. And I love to tell you this, but anything that you love, you will grieve. Anything that you love, you will grieve. And if it loves you, it will grieve you. Okay? Like that's it. I don't care if it's a dog. Like, you're going to grieve it. And so I think that it's important for us to be aware of this huge sense of loss. And just like Sarah said, where is your bent? And so I'm going to put it out there to the audience. When you have lost things, be it a job, sometimes we lose to go into Coco's question, right? So thank you, M. And peace and blessings to you, Kay Johnson. But to Coco's point, sometimes the type of things that we lose are inanimate things. There are relational losses. There are financial losses. There is the loss of hopes and dreams. There is the loss of one's physical capability. And and I think that there is also the loss of, I said physical, there's your dreams. I think I said that one too, but it's several categories. So it depends on what it is. And Sarah, do you remember in grad school? Go ahead.
Oh, I just was going to add a few. I was thinking identity loss.
Ooh, so, speak more to that.
I think a loss of identity can often result from other types of losses. So when we put our identity in something, whether it was a job and we lost our job and now our identity was placed in that job and our worth and value was placed in that job, all of a sudden we're having like a life extra crisis because we didn't just lose the job. We also lost our sense of self. So
it's kind of like, all right. So for me, because I'll in the moment of transparency, I'll be transparent. I had uterine fibroids, and the doctors, when I went to the doctor, they were just like, "Oh, you could just get a hysterectomy," and I was like, "What?" Like, no. And the doctor just cavalierly said it. And I had discovered I didn't understand that I had tied part of my identity to my female reproductive system. I had never honestly thought about it that deeply. And when he said it, I was like, no. Like, I wanted to actually curse. And I remember crying, like, are you serious? And he was like, oh, we don't have to do that. And then he kind of made a statement like, some people, their identity isn't necessarily tied to their reproductive system. And I'm like, who? Show me. Because in my mind, I'm like, if this is impacted by me, then if I'm impacted by this, then I know a lot of people are. So is that what you mean by identity?
Yeah, that's definitely an example. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Any other types? You said identity.
I don't know if you said material, obviously relationships, role losses. So like when kids go away to college and they don't have kids in the home anymore, that's a loss. Yeah, system losses. So like even thinking of the topic we were going to talk about, like the failure of the church or the failure of the government or the failure of a profession. That's like a type of system loss.
Right.
That we could experience that has a impact of grief. Yeah.
Yeah.
Then there's actual and imagined losses as well.
Right. Speak more to that. Actual and imagined.
So imagined could be like a loss of trust, for instance.
Because you spoke about the church and then that's where your mind went?
Kind of, yeah. No, I mean, that could be an actual loss, but imagined like, sometimes we could perceive that there's been a loss of trust and that's something that we're grieving, or if there's like, insecurity in relationships, the stuff that's more in our heads, perceived losses.
Right. I think that I may show a clip and fair use if I do, but in fact, could somebody, Coco or somebody, write fair use in the chat and I'll put it up if we should show it. But from KB on Southside Rabbi, he spoke about the deep sense of loss he felt when there was the killing of Trayvon Martin. And he said, up until that point, a lot of hip hop artists that were reformed in theology, that were Calvinists, that were John MacArthur quoting, John Piper stating, when they saw what happened, and then they saw the response from the white evangelical church, it was like, wait, what is going on? Like that, they felt like the carpet was pulled from under their feet, and it exposed the chasm that was there that they didn't even know was there. So, like that. That's what you're talking about, Krista. Did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, similarly, I read a book by a woman who talks about the process of grief and healing she had to go through when her spouse cheated on her, and just what that was like. The loss of that intimacy, the loss of the state of relationship she thought she had, the loss of trust in him, but also trust in herself. Like, why didn't I see this? What's wrong with me? The insecurities, and just like that process of grieving this relationship and the hopes that came with it. Like it just was hopes that came with it. People, often if you're engaged and it doesn't work out, you don't get married. That is grieving. Um, Parents who grieve the loss of a child, either in utero or after birth, is loss of hope. I don't think you just grieve the actual physical person not being there, but you also grieve the hopes and the dreams that you now cannot have because they're no longer here.
Yeah, I think that just speaking, just again, I'm just gonna be real transparent today. In speaking about like loss, right? So as somebody who is single, I think that, and I'm getting older, right? I think that society often reminds you of your viability and your uterine and your your uterine viability, right? Um, and then there is the relational loss that you could be thinking about. And I didn't think that I really wanted to be in a relationship until recently. And then like I started thinking like, did that door close? And that creates a different type of loss, like and that's an ebbing loss. That's not necessarily a definite loss, because that's a different type of grief, because you're partially grieving, but you have a little hope that something may happen. But then at the same time, you're grieving the days that went by. And and what happens is, if you get stuck in that, you cannot appreciate your now, and you can constantly be anxiously looking forward or regretfully looking behind. And that's one of the things that can happen if you don't grieve well the times past. um and then there's the ebbing grief, the like, especially if it's a relationship. And I'm not, and again, I'm not just talking about romantic. You can have a friend. Let me tell you this: I've had more heartache from friends than from exes. And I've been involved in some ridiculous stuff with my exes. And I have had more heartache from friends and desires to just be mended and things. Like, even now, I'm thinking of people, literally, as I'm speaking, people are going through my head where it's just like, what do you do when you can't make it right? Like it says in Amos 3:3, how can two walk together unless they agree? There are some times where you literally have to separate, right? So that's that. Or the mom or the dad who is literally praying for their wayward child, their prodigal child. That is a type of loss too. So I think that when we think about loss, there's the definite, there's the ebbing, it's almost like cancerous type of loss that we have to prepare ourselves for. And grief, again, is going to happen if you love. In fact, I once heard it said that grief is love persevering despite loss. And I think that what we like to do is we like to be numb. So, with that being said, Sarah, did you want to say anything else to that, or did I kind of?
No, I love everything that you said. I think that's great. One thing I do want to say is that I do keep noticing as we keep talking, I keep trying to notice my body. And every time I do, I take a deep breath because I realize, oh, I'm still carrying tension in my body. For me, it's my jaw. It tends to be my jaw. I clench my jaw and my throat. And so anytime that you say like, oh, I'm going to be connected to myself and be real today, that helps me actually, because I'm like, oh, that's right. And then I take a deep breath. So that's something we all want to be doing. Our viewers, be connecting with ourselves, taking deep breaths to relax our body, because we often don't realize that we're carrying stress and tension in our bodies.
Right. And so why do you think we avoid, both of you, I'm asking you, Sarah, and you, Crystal, why do you think we avoid grief? And those in the chat, why do you think we avoid grief?
It's painful. I think that's the most obvious first answer.
Yeah, it is. It's painful.
It is an unwelcomed, unwanted interruption of the illusion of security. Grief is like, I don't even know what it's invasive. It is unrelenting. It is, it's it reveals to you and makes you aware and sober to the fact that you are not in control. That illusion of security you have from having some level of power on a daily basis, it is just that, an illusion. You're not in control. Um, yeah, it's, from the crying uncontrollably to the, you know, to the,
Mm.
let me take that.
It's okay. If you gotta step away, step away.
Yeah. I think too, like connecting with what you're saying, it's remembering or being reminded or maybe even realizing that this world is broken and jacked up. Like we live in a broken and jacked up world, and we weren't actually made for this. Like,
What do you
right?
mean when you say that?
That when God created the world, we were meant to live in perfect harmony and goodness. Nothing was meant to be broken. It was meant to be beautiful and wholeness, and then really brokenness and evil and
And death itself.
death entered into the world because of sin,
Mhm.
So, and I think oftentimes we're spending our lives trying to like believe that we're living in the oasis of the beginning of creation. And then when there's a loss, we're struck with the reality that that was all an illusion.
That's what Chris meant.
Yeah.
See, the thing about grief is it is a slap of cold water in your face. Like that this earth is not your home. It's not. And I think a lot of times we try to make this earth our home. We try to bring heaven on earth so that, and I'm specifically going to talk about a lot of things in Western Christendom right now. We tend to live in like these two camps of like asceticism, where it's all the doctrines of suffering and I'm flogging myself and I'm making sure that I have a hard life. Or we have this prosperity, health, and wealth, name and claim it, blab it and grab it mentality, where I was supposed to be the head and not the tail. You're not going to tell me to do. And it is bananas. Both are incorrect. The Bible clearly tells us to rejoice with those who rejoice and then to mourn with those who mourn. Both are true. This earth is not our home. This world is broken, but we are to steward it, to love it, to represent God's light on it, which means we will grieve, because what happens on this earth is grievous to the Lord also. And it was actually then the inadequacy of certain pastors being able to answer my question that actually catapulted me into having a deeper understanding about grief. Because a lot of times, especially with Christians, if you understand that God is good, that's the thing that scares us, actually. And it's the thing that makes us lie at funerals, because we know that God is good. And then we know that if he's a good God, and that this person that just passed away was not good in our eyes, we don't know how to rationalize those two things, right? But what we miss is, because he's good in everything. So his judgment is also going to be good and righteous. So we don't have to fear that. And we can remember the goodness and the truth about the person at the same time. We don't have to conflate the two. Go ahead, Sarah.
I just was going to say that I think like what you're sharing made me think about how often Christians connect faith with like joy in the midst of trials and like claiming, truth, but really allowing oneself and the capacity to engage in grief in the midst of losses is an act of faith.
How so? Speak to that. You can't just say that and just walk off.
Go ahead, Crystal. I want to hear what you have to say first.
I was gonna say it makes me think about I'm not gonna try to quote where it is, but in one of the gospels, or probably multiple gospels, Jesus is on his way to heal Lazarus. He's on his way to heal him. He
No,
knows.
he wasn't on his way to heal him.
He
was on his way to resurrect him.
To resurrect him.
That's a big difference. That's a big difference. Just saying.
To resurrect him, which was a whole other kind of healing. Okay. So he's on his way to resurrect him, and he knows that he's going to do this. And on the way, he meets his grieving sisters, his grieving family. And they're, as they weep and as they, accuse him, if you were here, just yada yada. And it says that he wept as he was on his way to perform this miracle. He took the time to weep. He took the time to allow himself to feel the pain, even though he knew the hope that was before him. He took the time to feel the pain, and he chose to weep. And that is comforting to me, because it lets me know, one, that I don't have a savior who cannot relate. But two, I also have a savior who set the example and chose to allow the sorrow to be sorrow, not to ignore it, to detach from it, to whatever, but he allowed it. He allowed that space.
I love that. Yeah. Thank you, Crystal. Yeah. When I was thinking about grief being an act of faith, I think the passages I tend to go to is Habakkuk 1, just because it's a book I've studied. And I've thought to myself, I want to preach on Habakkuk. But in the beginning, he's literally saying to God, how long am I going to cry to you for help? And how long till you're going to hear me? Like, there's violence going on. When are you going to save? Right. And he's talking about his people, his people, Israel. They're living lives of violence, and he's essentially questioning God. And he even says, if you're the God of justice, where's the justice, is what he's saying, right? So we could say, oh my gosh, Habakkuk is questioning God, he's lost his faith. But no, he's actually living out faith in grieving what's going on in his people and questioning God, because he's saying, I believe what you say, that you're a God of justice. So where's the justice, right? So oftentimes we Christians can tend to correct or put down individuals who are asking these hard questions about the faith as though they're losing their faith, or doubting God, or not loving God, when actually really they are saying, I believe that this is, if this is who God says that he is, then what's going on? So it's important for us in the midst of grief to be able to ask these hard questions.
Yeah. I'm going to, in a couple of minutes, probably play the section, because you kind of segue right into it, Sarah, of what, and I agree, Char, it's painful. That's why people don't want to address it. That's why people don't want to talk. And real quick, Sarah, do you remember, he was one of the fathers of CBT. I might be putting you on the spot right now. Who was it who said that all human behavior is the avoidance of pain and the pursuit of pleasure? Was it Allender? The dude from UPenn that eventually went to Penn, or worked at Penn? Not went to Penn, but worked at Penn.
I don't remember.
Oh, look at that. Look at that. I think that so I think it's important for us, and those are in the chat. Maybe, if I don't know if Harrison is still Dre from Harrison Family Values, who's a social worker. I think it was Adler, whatever his name is, from Penn, one of the fathers of CBT, who said that all human behavior is the avoidance of pain and the pursuit of pleasure. And again, thank you for your preemptive fair use, Coco, because it is important for us to watch. And so I'm just going to play this. This is from Southside Rabbi. They're actually talking about grief and loss, and they're talking about the book of Job, which is something that people often recommend individuals read when they're grieving. And I don't necessarily know if that's the best book to tell people to read when they're grieving, because people can take it as like God is going to tell you just to shut up, but that's not it. So if you're not in the right frame of mind, I don't recommend you reading that or Ecclesiastes if you're grieving. Just like if you're struggling with your purity, I don't recommend you reading Song of Songs. I'm just saying, it just may not be the best book for you. I actually would highly recommend the Psalms when people are grieving, because there's a lament there. And I'm trying to remember which specific Psalm it is where it's the only Psalm where there's no resolve. Like David is just like, or the psalmist is just like, because I don't know if it was David or Asaph, but like, look, it's all messed up. And it's just like the end of the psalm. It's like, man, it's no, but God is, nope, it's just all messed up. And sometimes that is what it is. Sometimes that is what it is. And yes, there's a but God, but there is a time that we have to spend before we get there. I think the fact that it took 3 days for the resurrection to take place, God could have did it instantly, but the fact that it was a death on Saturday, on the first day, and then that silent Sabbath, that silent middle day, to me is one of my most favorite days in that whole holy weekend, because it's saying God is doing something when you feel at your worst, when hell is loud and heaven seems silent. There is a work happening. And not to be extra biblical, but the morning actually starts when it's dark out. Just let that preach. Like more the next day, you know how people be like, you know the verse, y'all know the verse, weeping may endure for the night, but joy cometh in the morning. And we like, well, when the morning coming? Because this all I see is night. I'm saying it's already morning. You just ain't see the sun yet. And that's okay. I'm not saying that to rush it. I'm not saying that to throw a quick cliche at it. I'm saying it's going to have its work. Like the Bible says, let patience have its work. It's going to have its work. So I hope this is at the right point. If not, we'll find out. Tell me if you hear this with an echo. Again, just like what Coco said, fair use. Tell me if you all hear this with an echo. Give me a second. Boop, 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 boop.
Still goes on.
Oh, this is about the book of Job again, and how not to befriend someone who is grieving if you are a Christian, especially anyone. This is good advice, but especially if you're a Christian. So the story is Job had everything like taken from him. It was this big, he got caught in the middle of like the enemy. The devil tried to basically say to the Lord, I can make Job curse you. And the Lord said, it's not going to happen, but do what you will. And Job lost all this stuff. Now, I'm not going to get into like, what is that? But we could talk about that later. But Job lost all this stuff. And so his friends are coming around and they're trying to give him perhaps some information on why his life is going the way it is. So, yeah. And this is a lot of times what Christians do when there's significant back-to-back losses. I remember one of my friends saying something like, dang, Lee, you got all this death in your family. Every time I turn around, somebody dying. And I was like, you know what? Forgive me, God, for what I'm thinking about this person right now. So, yeah. And they were a Christian, of course, because God don't do curses. And that obviously is a curse. So that's how they thought. But let's listen.
Then the Lord answers Job in 38, right? They basically were saying, hey, nobody suffers the way that you suffered unless they did something wrong. Job gives a great argument in two of the chapters when he actually goes on this rant about how the wicked are prospering in the world. And he's basically saying to them, if what y'all were saying was true, the wicked would not be prospering, y'all, right? Like, y'all, and I love how Job tells them, y'all know that this is true. Y'all are looking at the wicked and they prosper. So what you guys are saying about God's judgment only coming upon a man like this if they are wicked, right? It means, like, if this judgment is coming upon them, it must mean they sin. That can't be 100% true the way that you think it is, because look at all these wicked men that we know that are not suffering at all in this world. So I think that Job is like, it's crazy, man. Like, to me,
there is also the condensing all of God's presence, blessing, and favor.
Is it still an echo, Coco?
Oh, that's really good. Yes, that's what they were doing.
Even Elihu is showing his distortion of how the world works in chapter 36. He does not keep the wicked alive, but gives the afflicted their right. He does not withdraw his eye from the righteous, but with the kings, with kings on the throne, he sets them forever, and they are exalted. And if they are bound in chains and caught in the cords of affliction,
All right, really quick. Coco or Kay Johnson, could you tell me if you heard an echo? I know the panel, we didn't hear an echo, right? Yeah, so some people heard an echo. Said it's a bad echo. A bad echo. All right. Hold on, I'm gonna go back. I'm sorry for that. Thank you for letting me know that it was an echo. All right, so I have to mute myself. So I'm going to mute myself, and then I'm going to go back. And again, to quote Coco, fair use. I'm going to go back and just set this up. This is Job's friends trying to tell him that the reason why something bad is happening is because it must be something that you're doing, right? All right, I'm going to go in right now.
That are not suffering at all in this be prospering, y'all, right? Like, y'all, and 34 he still goes on, 35 he still goes on, 36 he still goes on, 37 he still goes on. Then the Lord answers Job in 38, right? They basically were saying, hey, nobody suffers the way that you suffered unless they did something wrong. Job gives a great argument in two of the chapters when he actually goes on this rant about how the wicked are prospering in the world. And he's basically saying to them, if what y'all were saying was true, the wicked would not be prospering, y'all, right? Like, y'all, and I love how Job tells them, y'all know that this is true. Y'all are looking at the wicked and they prosper. So what you guys are saying about God's judgment only coming upon a man like this if they are wicked, right? It means, like, if this judgment is coming upon them, it must mean they sin. That can't be 100% true the way that you think it is, because look at all these wicked men that we know that are not suffering at all in this world. So I think that Job is like, it's crazy, man. Like, to me,
there is also the condensing all of God's presence, blessing, and favor,
right?
To visible signs of success.
Oh, that's really good. Yes, that's what they were doing.
Even Elihu is showing his distortion of how the world works in chapter 36. He does not keep the wicked alive, but gives the afflicted their right. He does not withdraw his eye from the righteous, but with the kings, with kings on the throne, he sets them forever, and they are exalted. And if they are bound in chains and caught in the cords of affliction, then declares to them their work and their transgressions, that they are behaving arrogantly. Right. So that's how it works.
And that's wrong.
You're a king and everything's going good, then God is with you.
Yep.
And even the wicked. Yeah, you say that wicked prosper, but no, not really. He won't keep them alive.
Right.
Wicked people live for a long time too. Wicked people kill it for a long time too.
That's so true, man.
You're also revising the way the world works.
Right.
Into neat categories in which the righteous are always
safe and good
and prosperous, and the wicked are not. Which I think.
And that's why Job is going in this chapter. He was like, he was basically like, y'all know that this is not how it works. That's why Job gives all of these examples of reality.
If somebody is doing something that is wrong, like they're sinning against a person or against the church, something like that, And people may come around that person and rightly warn them.
Right.
Hey, you're messing with God's people, bro. You're messing with God's anointed. Like, this isn't safe for you to do. Mm-hmm. The next sentence is typically, God could ruin your business. He could hurt your marriage, allow your marriage to fall apart. Someone could die in your family.
Right.
You could lose some kind of reputation and notoriety. The visible signs of judgment is how we talk about that. Mm-hmm. Even in, how we might warn somebody that they're making a bad decision that is not honoring to God. Mm-hmm. It's, if I say a dark cloud might be on your life, I'm talking about the visible signs of judgment.
Right.
But what I've literally been thinking about this all week. Mm-hmm. Visible signs of judgment, we know theologically, is very hard to discern if it's judgment or not. So the visible signs of distress or visible signs of difficulty or suffering, it's not easy to weigh them as where God's heart is in the situation.
Like you will look at Job's situation.
And blessings work the same way.
Right.
Right. I think that goes back to what we were talking about the illusions that we make up, like we come up with. We create our own culture and we call it biblical. We create our own standards and we say they're of God. And instead of really trying to know God, who were you? I don't know if you were talking about Job or if you were talking about when you were talking about Habakkuk and him questioning, how would he get the answer? Like, our faith is like a muscle. It needs to constantly be worked and constantly be strengthened. If we are intelligent beings. The way we glean information is by interest and retention, like retaining the answers. So if we don't ask these questions of God, then how do we get to know him? How do we get to know the answers? How do we get to know that part of who he is?
Something I was thinking about as they were talking was, as the second guy was talking, was about, I just started thinking about Ravi Zacharias and how he did not have to suffer any losses or this side. I say that carefully because he did actually suffer losses, but he didn't consciously suffer them. Like, because he was getting away with sin, right? So he was getting away with his sin, and he actually lost a lot, but he had no idea what he was losing. And so it just made me think too about the importance of loss from that perspective, the importance when we are sinning, the importance of suffering loss for the wellness of our communities, for the wellness of our soul. Because when we avoid loss in the midst of sin, we generally tend to be filling ourselves with other things to make us feel better so that we don't have to be faced with the consequences.
Yeah, I started to title this, even on the thumbnail, it's called Good Grief. Because I think that, it's a play on the term good grief, but I think there is a way to have good grief. And I think also that grief can actually be good because if we allow it to take us to the dark places, we will get through the dark places. And to Crystal's point, the thing that gets us through those dark places is the hope. And one of the things that we lose as a consequence of sin is actual hope. And so you can be prospering. It's been times when I could be in sin and I'm thinking, okay, this is great. Nobody knows that I'm in sin, but God knows. And the thing that I'm actually losing is a conscience. I'm searing my conscience about that particular issue, but to the world, it can look like one thing. And I think that we talk about grief and loss and relational loss. I think that one of the most difficult types of losses that you can suffer is a spiritual loss, like is a loss that comes from huge consequences from your actions. Like David's kingdom was not the same since. I literally was reading in Matthew. I was talking to Crystal and I was reading the genealogy. I started over and reading it. Now I done read this a lot of times, but I started over and then it spoke about David. It was like Jesse had David and David had Solomon. And then it said whom he took from Uriah, the wife of Uriah. I'm like, dang, it's hundreds of years later and they're still remembering him based off of that. Now, here's the thing too. The balance is also true, right? Like with again, the Bible says all things work together for the good of them that love God, that are the called according to his purpose, right? So Solomon, God used Solomon to be in the lineage. You understand what I'm saying? So it's a lot, which was the kid of an affair. And again, for those who aren't Christians who are watching this, please read the Old Testament. It is real scandalous. It's like really great. The stories in it are beautiful. And after you read it, you cannot boast in anything. You can't boast in your flesh. You can be like, yo, God is amazing because I would have killed everybody long time ago's days, right? So, but he didn't, and he's great. And it shows us how he will use our mistakes. He will use our faults. He will use our flat out rebelliousness for our good and his glory as we repent and follow him. And I think that what grief can do is grief can expose your belief system or lack thereof. You will find out who you really think God is when you grieve. You will. You can think like, oh no, God, you my rock, you my this. But read Observance of Grief by C.S. Lewis and see what he says. Like, so yeah. Go ahead, Kristen. Were you gonna say something?
Yeah, that observance of grief, that's a harsh one. I'm just like, no. I had to take a break from that one because I was like, I am not there. Like, I'm not that bad. Like, but yeah, I think just bringing it full circle, reading the Old Testament or just understanding, you know, the Bible is a historical book. A lot of what is in it is the history of people. Um, People groups, namely specifically the Israelites. Um, but and I think Sarah pointed to this earlier. There is a theme in the Bible that is always coming back to. We were created to exist in a particular way. God had, when in the beginning, before the fall, he said it was good. There was creation, there were animals, there was land, there was water, there was man, there was woman, and it was good. And then the fall happened. And a lot of the Bible, so when Liana called me and she was talking about that, a lot of times in the Bible, you will see glimpses that point you to what redemption is, what it means to be redeemed, and the hope that we have of God making right what was made wrong when the fall happened. And I think for me in the last year, and I was saying this earlier before I got emotional, I've come to terms with the fact that everything now reminds me of how things are not as they should be. But everything also reminds me of the fact that God did create good and things can be good. Um, and that those glimpses of good that we get here fuel the hope for that ultimate good that will be restored someday. Um, so yeah, I think that just remembering, we often look for our purpose. What's my purpose here? What's my purpose here? What am I supposed to do here? I think just focus on the ultimate purpose. Um, and I'm not saying don't ask those questions to God. You can totally ask those questions to God. But here is not our home. It's not. It's not eternal. And whether you believe in God or not, one thing we can agree on is we're not going to be here forever. We're all going to have to face what is eternal at some point. And I'd rather spend my time here making sure that I know it's true and what's going to happen during that time, because it's a lot longer than this time.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a shout out. I was able to look at the Facebook, and I see shout out to Char, who's on, and I know she came over, and to Sister Pam, who said that she detaches from reality in light of grief, and definitely to our sister Linnea, who's just like, I finally caught y'all on a live. Thank you so much for those who are tapping in. Part of the reason why we are doing this is so that we can continue to produce great information. So again, to seems like maybe related to Crystal Clear over there, but that's true that we are doing this so that we can have some knowledge in the back of our mind of what's going on, and so we can know how to help people. So really quick, what are some of the things you should not say? We kind of showed an example of it, but what are some of the things, and y'all can put it in the chat when for those who are watching this in real time. I know some people maybe a couple minutes behind, they caught it late or whatever, but what are some of the things you should not say when people are grieving? Okay. Anybody want to start? I'll start. Why you think? I see Sarah has a thinker face. Go ahead, Chris.
You should, two things. I'm gonna say this. You should not say anything that has to do with making whatever is going on with that person about you. So you hear that something tragic happened, and it automatically opens up something in you. It like Lee said earlier, when you hear that someone has died, it makes you face the reality of your mortality. Don't make it about you. When it is someone else's season of grief, your responsibility is to be considering, thinking, seeking, praying about how to be a comfort. Not asking, well, what happened? Well, did you know it was going to happen? Don't ask questions that make it about them answering your questions or easing your questions or comforting you. Make it about the person. What will bring them comfort in that moment?
Another thing, I'm going to what Coco said in just a second. I'm actually going to highlight it. What Coco said in just a second. Part of the reason, something that we do that's really small is we say, oh, you're going to make me cry. Stop. You're going to make me cry. Or don't do that. You're going to make me cry. Again, that is centering around yourself. And what is happening is you are intentionally being apathetic in that moment, or to be gracious to the individual, you yourself know that you cannot handle what is about to happen. So if it's important for you to know, to be self-aware enough to know the parameters that you can help with, right? So that way you don't give unrealistic expectations. I'll be there for you anytime, no, you can't. As humans, we literally don't have the capacity to do that. So that's very important. And again, I know how you're feeling. No, you don't. You can relate. Be like, I can relate to what I think you're feeling. But I think also when we tell somebody, I understand exactly what you're going through with things like that, that's doing exactly what Chris said, is putting the focus on you and taking it off the person. Again, this is to help us to go from being well-meaning to actually having the impact that we want to have on individuals. Because oftentimes we judge other people by their actions and want people to judge us by our intentions. And so that's really important for us to remember that how people receive your love is different than how you intended to give your love. So what we're doing, the reason why we're going over this is so that when people are hurting, we can say, okay, this is how you more effectively love an individual. It's not so that we can bang on or belittle or highlight individuals who are really going through something, right? And I heard one, but it was light on my end. Oh, I guess that's an echo. I guess that's in response to the echo. Some people are a couple minutes behind. This person said, "Oh my goodness, were they sick?" Yep. Sometimes people say that too. Sometimes people say that too. Linnea Hill said, "Personally, I don't assume how to know the person." She said, "Personally, I don't assume how to know the person is feeling, and I don't do a lot of talking, so I can let them express the best way that they can. I can say that I'm sorry for their loss and let them know that I am praying. Some people just don't grieve immediately or at all. Some don't even know, don't even know to grieve or even how to grieve." And I think that that's true too. Sorry, it's on this little phone and I had to hit the expand button. But yes, I totally agree, Nay. Sometimes the best thing to say is "I'm praying for you," or just don't say anything. Jewish people have the practice of sitting shiva, and sitting shiva is when you just come up beside the person. They just sit in these chairs. They get these mourner chairs. They just sit, and you just sit with them. Sometimes you don't say nothing. It came from Job, so you just don't say anything. Sometimes the best thing to say is nothing, and I think that is important too. And oh my goodness, were they sick? I wouldn't ask that to the individual that's grieving. I'm gonna be honest. I would ask that to somebody else, but not to the individual that was grieving. When people do that, it's because they're trying to rationalize their own grief. They're trying to give a reason as to why this loss is taking place, because it gives them, again, to Crystal and Sarah's point earlier, it gives them a sense of control. It helps to ground them. So that's what people are doing when they're asking those factual questions. But sometimes it's okay to let your tears be your words, or let a hug be the "I'm here for you." Anything else? What shouldn't somebody say?
Well, I was just going to say, I'm glad that you brought up like Jewish practices, because I was sitting here thinking about the answers to this question could be different based off of culture, right? So I don't know that I have any like specific examples right now that come to mind, but I do know that in my own relationship, because I am dating somebody who is a Boricua from Puerto Rico, that sometimes he does their practices when he's trying to empathize with me. But it doesn't work because I'm not from his culture and I have felt offended. And so we have to work through that, understanding like cultural differences, because it's very well intentioned, but just culturally uninformed, right? So, and I do the same thing to him. So I just was thinking that these kinds of things could vary based off of culture. But another thing I thought of that I wanted to add was not giving advice or trying to fix. That's something that we can move into, or maybe we're like giving all these scripture passages to try to be an encouragement. And I think often that comes out of our own uncomfortability with grief. We can jump to wanting to move a person to a place of hope. And that's not really where where they're needing to go at that time. So we need to be willing to sit in the grief ourselves. Yeah.
Anything else for those who are watching? Crystal, YouTube, what are the things you shouldn't say? I see that we had some other people kind of pop in. What are the things you shouldn't say to people who are grieving, who are going through a loss, be it any type of loss?
Right. Yeah, I think so. As someone who knows very well the losses that I've experienced, um, my recent struggle is people reminding me. Um, my siblings both tragically passed away young. And immediately when the the most recent sibling passed away, everybody went to the wow again. Yeah. Again, my goodness, I can't imagine what you're feeling. I can't imagine what you're going through. And I'm talking immediate. I'm trying to breathe. I'm trying to function. And naturally, yes, like the pain, of course. I'm aware, like just not if it's someone who has suffered a good amount of tragic loss, saying nothing is actually a really good go-to, even if that's what you're thinking. Because I don't think anyone means it in a mean way. I think people want to empathize and they want to sympathize, but I just wouldn't go to the oh my gosh, this happened again. Like that's not. Just be careful what you say.
You're muted, Leigh. Leigh, you're muted.
Unmute.
I think it was the thank you. I think it was the urban prophet Gucci Man who said something that people often go by when they're in a relational breakup. He said, "Girls like buses. Miss one, next 15, one coming." I think that is horrible advice to give to somebody. I think listening to the modern day prophets and prophetesses like Beyonce, to the left, everything you own in a box to the left. I could have another you in a minute. Matter of fact, he'll be here any minute. I think that is horrible things to say. It creates bitter birds and very, very, very unhealthy, toxic individuals. I think it's horrible. But I also think, again, the music we kind of go to it when we are grieving kind of lets us know where our heart is sometime, and another thing, don't say you'll get another one. Don't say God only gives us what we can bear. Don't say God gives his toughest battles to his strongest warriors. Don't say that. Definitely don't say this. Don't say definitely don't say this. The scripture says you have not because you ask not. Like you don't want to say that, right? So I think it's extremely, extremely important. And to right, especially when that's the case. Folks, if you cannot relate to all of the struggle that people go to, just please have several seats. Job's friends were theologically sound according to the time. The God said, "I'll bless those who obey and I'll curse those who don't." Like, so there was theological grounds for them to say that, but what they were saying was wrongly applying God's word. So I think that it's important that we can be theologically sound. I think it's important that we could be theologically sound and still be off and missing God's heart in the moment. So with that having been said, what are some of the things? Yes, if someone ever said the struggle is real, what? If a person of color, especially a black person, gives you two faces, three, just know you're in the wrong. If they give you this face, they think you're lying. Okay? If they give you this face, you're suspect. And if they give you this face, They're done. They're done. It's like, what am I gonna do?
And all the white people's faces will be blank and expressionless, and you'll have no idea what it is that they're thinking. You have to ask. And they might not tell you.
Yeah, I love you, Sarah.
Right. 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 I think that it's extremely important for us to note the things that people shouldn't say. Stuff like, you'll get over it, man. Listen, you got to suck it up. Be a man. Which is, to me, is ridiculous. What does that mean? Be iron? That's not manly. Just like if somebody needs to soften up, I'm not like, hey, grow some ovaries. Like, what is going on? Like this.
And really, to be honest, a more authentic expression to all of these statements that you're making, which is what the people are really saying, would be, I feel really uncomfortable with grief and I just want to fix it right now. Like, I just want to say something so that it feels better because I feel so uncomfortable and I don't know what to do.
Yep. But I agree with you 100%. But to Linnea's point earlier, people don't even know that that's what they're experiencing, and they don't even know how to say that. And to say that would make you, the V word, vulnerable. And God forbid you were that, right? So what are some of the things? Now, we talked a lot about were you going to say something else, Chris, real quick, or no?
Yeah, just to the grieving who have to hear that. Who just understanding that I'm reading, or I'm finishing in the middle of a book called Hope for the Hurting. And one of the points that Tony Evans wrote the book, he makes in the book is, you, even in your pain, you have to, in some ways, consider others. Like, just be sober. So, as someone who personally has had to figure out how to love people as they're trying to love me and may or may not be doing it well or correctly, just figuring out how to create those boundaries. So sometimes when people go to ask certain questions, I'll just say, I really can't answer that question. It's not helpful for me right now. Or, or people automatically, I'm definitely naturally an extrovert. So when I'm hurting, I'm an introvert, and people want me to like come around. I tend, no, it's okay. I just got to be by myself. So just be willing to love those who are trying to love you, even if they're not doing it very well. Because I don't think anyone means to not do it well.
Right. So Crystal kind of answered the next question before I asked it, which is, what should we be doing for people? I know we were talking about what we shouldn't be doing. And what shouldn't, what should we be doing? How could we be loving people who have lost? What are some of the things that we could be doing or saying? Crystal started it out by just giving your presence and saying, a simple question, how can I help? Sarah gave another example of saying, this is what I'm feeling because I just really want to fix it. And Crystal spoke before about not making it about you. So, panel and folks who are listening and watching, what are some of the things that we could actually do or say to assist someone when they're grieving?
I think something that we can do, this is not necessarily of assistance in like a practical sense, but is cry with the person, grieve with the person, but not to the degree that then they have to take care of you, obviously. So, but allow yourself to feel the feelings that the other person is feeling with them. Something else I was thinking is oftentimes people will say, let me know if you need anything, which isn't really very helpful because they're not going to let you know. And oftentimes people don't even know what they need, to be honest. So part of it is like doing the work of figuring out, like I myself, even though I'm a therapist, when I have somebody close to me that's experienced a loss, sometimes I'm like, let me go do some research to remind myself of like what kinds of things I could do. Or like, maybe I need to talk to somebody who's closer to the person to ask them, is there any way you think of that I could be of help or that I could be of an encouragement? And maybe they'll tell you they just need space right now. Okay. And then I can maybe send a message to someone saying, I know you need space right now. So like, I'm just going to give you that, but I want you to know that I am thinking of you and I really care about you. don't feel the need to respond to this message at all, you know? So those are just my initial thoughts.
I'm going to agree with the ugly cry and even let the snot bubbles blow. I also think something you can do, I do think asking people, how can I help you, is okay. And then let them know if you don't know, that's okay too. And also acknowledging the limits of what you can and can't do. Say, listen, I'm available from this time to this time on this day. And for some people, they may get upset, and that's okay. I think we're going to talk in a second about self-care for yourself as you are grieving or as you are assisting someone who is grieving. But one of the things I want those who are helping or walking along others who are grieving to know is give yourself grace, because the grieving process is ugly and people will snap on you and won't even know why they're snapping on you. I remember my nephew when his mom passed. We were driving in the car and he slapped me in the face while we were driving. He's a 5-year-old. He was a feisty 5-year-old boy. And he was angry. He was crying and he was like, "Shut up, you dummy." And I wasn't even talking. And when he said it, I just started bawling and I said, "Man, I'm sorry. I am so sorry." He said, "Keep talking, I'm gonna hit you." And I was driving a car that a family member had that didn't have any seatbelts in the back. And he was in the back. And I was just like, oh man, if this guy hits me and I swerve, it's going to be bad. So then he go, wham, and he hit me and I kind of swerved a little bit. And he was like, I'm going to do it again. And I reached my hand back. And I kind of like, between the collar and the neck, kind of like, boom. And I was like, dude, you can be in pain. And I can't even imagine what you're feeling right now. But that does not give you the right to hurt or harm any of us. Because if you hurt me, we're not going to make it. And that's not going to make either one of us happy. And I'm sorry. And he just said, he just broke. And I seen adult versions of that. I have seen adults lash out because of grief, because they don't know how to handle it, because nobody taught them how to do it, and because no matter what anyone says, it's not gonna fix it. There's no fixing it. So I've seen that, and it's okay for us as caregivers to not have it 100% right, but we need to be learning the lessons as we go along. So I just wanted to give us that, grace.
And I think too, like, what you're saying makes me think of, when you're on a plane and they say, make sure you put on your oxygen mask before you put on the oxygen mask of your child sitting next to you, that we also need to be intentionally taking care of ourselves in the midst of walking alongside somebody with grief so that we can go it for the long haul. And then I think what you're saying too is you're talking about boundaries. Like, it's still important to have boundaries in the midst of grief, which includes taking care of yourself and not, because I think for the people who are more like the bleeding heart types, they can just like then be giving 100 all the time, every day, thinking about it. They're never getting a break. And then they're in drowning with the person as well and are no longer effective or of use. So.
Right. Yeah. I think one of the best things that was said was know your lane. Grief happens on different levels in different ways. Like someone who is empty nester all of a sudden, and they might be grieving the fact that their children are at home. If they're married, they realize they now have to get to know this person all over again. Their relationship is changing. If you can't relate to that, it's okay. Like know your lane. Like know what you are capable of doing. So maybe in that season, you might want to ask the question, what do you need? I personally like the question, like it to be more direct. As someone who, when I'm grieving, I don't know what I need. I would rather you ask me direct questions. When was the last time you ate? Do you have food? Do you need food? Um, do you? Is there any shopping I can do for you? Is there something you need me to pick up from your job? A family member that I can assist? Like practical things that I might not be thinking of are good things to ask. It's if you can do it. Don't ask if you can't do it. Ask if you can do it, which means you got to take that time to assess what you are capable of, and then only ask questions specific to what you can do, so that if the person does say, yes, I need that, you can fulfill the request, the question, that you asked. Yeah, know what you can do. And it's okay to wait until you do. Like, yeah, it's okay to not jump to like call right away. It's okay to say, all right, this is what I can do, and then call.
And as we segue into our last segment on self-care, how can we practice self-care if we are grieving or if we're comforting those who are grieving? I'm just going to speak to this really quick. I think that when it says men don't try to be strong for everyone, I know Coco, and I think that the issue is the illusion of strength from the beginning. You know what I mean? And I know Coco would agree with that. The whole I gotta be strong. Like, what is that? Sometimes Jesus was the strongest man ever, ever, ever. And he wept. He was weak. The strong person is not the person who puts on a facade and tries to keep it moving. The strong person is the person who acknowledges in a safe place where they are broken and then still does the thing that they need to do. I think that oftentimes we put ourselves in a false dichotomy by thinking like it's either I'm strong and productive or I'm weak and, like just non-productive. Like that's not how that works. You know what I mean? So I think that that's important too. And I think that as women, we need to understand that too. So yeah. And the last question for the last couple of minutes, Sarah, Crystal, y'all in the comment section, what are some ways that you can practice self-care? We've already gone over a couple. Sarah said be self-aware. Crystal said know, and both Crystal and Sarah said know your boundaries and the limitations of what you can do. And I said give yourself grace. So what are some other practical things that we can do?
I think we should start off at least with the basics in the sense of food, water, shelter, right? Like, are we eating? Are we sleeping? Are we drinking enough water? Do we have a roof over our heads, right? Like, are we safe? That's always step one. So I thought I'd start us off there.
I agree, because a lot of times those things actually get in the way of people actually grieving, like the Kendrick Lamar quote that Coco put up earlier. Like, so people can't even process their grief if they're thinking about where their next meal has to come from and things like that. So as the church, making sure that those things are taken care of can actually enable people to open up and see and meet God in different ways.
I think if you are the grieving, my recommendation, in addition to what Sarah said, is I got a couple of tips from different books, so I'm just going to throw out some of them. For me, get up, take a shower, and make your bed. I know it might not seem like a big deal and it might not seem like much, and I know it was only the Holy Spirit that gave me that thought. There's something, even if you don't go anywhere, getting up, taking a shower, and getting dressed, you're literally providing for your physical needs. And it keeps routine. And yeah, so that's one. And then the other thing is a recommendation I got from a book was to have appointed people that support your grief. So grief support point persons. You might have somebody that's on making sure you eat and you get your meals, You might have somebody that's on making sure that you take care of any business type stuff, somebody related to your working. You might have someone that's on errand duty or like your regularly scheduled things, like if it's kids you have to pick up, if it is phone calls you need to make. Um, Picking different people so that you don't burden one person with this responsibility is beneficial, or picking one person and asking them to find the other people and create that team, that support team would be helpful.
I'm going to say, in addition to acknowledging what you feel in your body, it's very important for us to get a couple minutes alone and literally write down what it is we need to do. I think that that is extremely beneficial. It can help calm the overwhelming feeling. Just have a piece of paper and write down what it is that you need to do. And then throughout the day, check those things off. And then the next day, go back and look at the one from the previous day and then add those to your list. So that goes back to those routine things that Crystal spoke about. I think also recognizing how you already cope. So sometimes you may want to, quote unquote, treat yourself to like a drink. But if you find yourself constantly going to alcohol or food or something that can become addictive, or people, I think it's important for you to understand your propensity for dependency is good. So being self-aware, again, in addition to having the basics, having a tribe, and having routine are extremely important. Yeah, I'm I think I'm good with those, and then having something that you can do short term, something you can do in a couple of weeks, and then something you can do maybe in a couple of months that are about self-care. Like for me, I'll like do my nails if I'm feeling down. And for me, the reason why when Crystal's nails aren't done, I'm checking on her. I'm checking on her, like what's going on. So this is for me. I'll do my nails. I'll go get my eyebrows threaded if I feel like I really don't care about a lot of pain. That's what I'll go and do. Um, those are ways that I practice um, I struggle with practicing self-care. So I have to, and another thing I do is I'll exercise. I've been exercising recently and I hate it. I hate it. Let me be clear. I hate exercising, but I know that it is worth it. Sarah, is there anything else you want to say?
I was just going to say again, connecting to our bodies, actually engaging in relaxation exercises, breathing exercises, mindfulness exercises. I don't know if you would want me to share about the 3 principles of neuroplasticity. Yes. Okay. So it's principles that are just about giving food to your brain to help it grow and develop and heal, etc. So one is exercise, as Leigh just said. The other one is focused attention. So oftentimes when we're going through situations of grief or stress, or we struggle with anxiety or whatever it is, we're up in our head thinking all the time, and we're no longer living in the present moment. So when we're washing the dishes, when we're taking a shower, we're not connected to the feel of the water on our hands or the soap. We're just up in our head. When we take a shower, which for many people, most people, I feel like is a pretty pleasurable experience, we're not feeling the warmth of the water beating on our bodies and taking a breath and soaking it in, if that makes sense. So it's focused attention is when I'm driving my car, instead of thinking again and ruminating on the same thing again, because it's not intentional rumination, it's out of control rumination. So instead of doing that while I'm driving my car, maybe I'll listen to a podcast if I can focus on that, or listen to music if I can focus on that. Or maybe if I can't focus on any of that, I'm just going to focus on what I see, what color the cars are that are passing by me, right? Then I'm embodied in the present moment, fully focused in the present moment. So we have exercise, we have focused attention, and now I'm forgetting the third one. Exercise, focused attention, and I'll come back when I remember what it is.
I also just wanted to say the benefit. Well, Sarah, could you speak to the benefit of this when you spoke about neuroplasticity? Like, what?
So basically, neuroplasticity is just talking about the fact that our brain can change. And so usually when people talk about neuroplasticity, they're focusing more on trauma and like developmental trauma that people went through, and maybe they're going to counseling to work on that. And so as a therapist, I want my clients to be engaging in these principles. Now I remember what the third one was, which is novel and new experiences that require creativity. So when we're engaged regularly in novel and new experiences that require creativity, we're tapping into something into our brain that kind of just lights up the brain in a good way. So these three principles are basically like, if you have a car and you don't have gas, you can't drive. So engaging in these principles is like putting gas in your car. So it's like putting gas in your brain so that then you can actually do the intentional processing work for healing in your brain, for healing in your body, etc. So neuroplasticity, the more they study trauma in the brain, they just see how the brain really has amazing capacity to heal. There's even something called post-traumatic growth, that some people never even have post-traumatic stress symptoms, but they worked through the traumatic experience that they just have. They have almost like a jump in post-traumatic growth that people that didn't go through that trauma experience don't get to experience, right? So, and that's because our brains have this amazing capacity to grow, to heal, to change. And it doesn't end in our lifetime. So even if you're in your 60s, you still have the capacity to put this fuel in your brain to help you to be able to heal and grow and respond more effectively, for instance, in the face of grief, etc.
Thank you. And what are the three again?
Exercise, focused attention, and novel and new experiences that require creativity.
I just want to highlight, don't allow grief to intimidate you. It is a part
Say that again. You kind of went low. Say it again.
Don't allow grief to intimidate you. It is a part of our life experiences. So the same way, not the same way, but obviously when people are expecting a child, they plan. You know, oftentimes they don't know what to expect or what to do. So you read books, you look at seminars, you whatever. Similarly, in every area of your life, work, you go to a mentor or someone above you for resources and guidance. When it comes to grief, don't allow it to intimidate you. If you don't know what to do or how to enter into that season, seek out support groups, therapy. My most recent loss, I was functional enough to email my therapist the next day and let them know I need an emergency appointment. This is what happened. So although I had regularly scheduled appointments, I knew I couldn't function without that additional session. Also, for those who are loving the grieving, don't be intimidated by their space or the process. It is a very necessary thing to do, like Liana said, to get along. Just even to be able to do what Sarah said, you sometimes have to separate. So yeah.
Yeah, something else I just wanted to jump in and say really quickly, because I had noticed somebody had wrote that they don't really get into journaling or something like that. And I just wanted to say that it's okay if journaling's not your thing. And in fact, for those of us who have a history of developmental trauma or trauma surrounding grief in our childhood, words actually aren't something that children use to process. They use more visualization and imagery. And so it may be more effective for many of us to engage in some form of art, not necessarily drawing or painting, but it could be music. It could be just more artistic forms of self-expression of what we're feeling inside that can be more creative. It taps into the emotion side of the brain, to be honest, better than words tend to.
It's funny because I actually was planning my friends, these are two of my closest friends. They both know that I was talking about starting a podcast and a vlog for years. It wasn't until the pandemic hit, and I was just like, I was feeling so much. And I was like, and I have the time. I got to do it. And it became a way for me to process. So if you go back, it's been about 2 years we've been doing this now. If you go back, it was just me coming in and just talking. That's part of the reason why we open the way we open and we close the way that we close. I say, hopefully you have a tribe that's pouring into you and one that you can pour into. And that's also why I say at the end of every show, remember, love God, love your neighbor, and take care of yourself. And part of taking care of yourself is knowing when you need to seek professional help. Sarah and I are both therapists, right? So I think sometimes it's important as caregivers to know the limits, like she said, your boundaries of what you can do and what you can't do. As therapists, we can kind of talk to one another about certain things. Like we've definitely used techniques on each other all the time. We do. But we also know I can't be a therapist. Crystal will tell you, like when she talks to me about certain things, Crystal will use the same words of counseling that I say to her back on me. And I'm like, yeah, I probably need to talk to somebody professional about this. She like, yeah, because I'm just saying what you said to me back. And there's times when I'm like, I don't know, what did such and such a therapist say about this? She like, you just going to say I need therapy right now? I'm like, no, it's not a bad thing. And I think that to take the stigma away from it, especially as Christians, to take the stigma away from it, especially as Black folk, to take the stigma away from it, especially from people in the West who feel like I don't need this, to take the stigma away from it. It's extremely important. My friends used to tell me all the time, stop shrinking me. And I wasn't trying to. One of the things that my professor said, and I won't forget this. He said sometimes, before I talk about that, I see that Linnea on Facebook stated that, we're all dealing with some type of PTSD, right? And we just need to know it's okay to not be okay. Now, it's important to note the difference between clinical PTSD and literally dealing with some type of trauma. Just because you are not diagnosable, quote unquote, you don't fit the criteria, does not mean you are healthy. I just want to say that. Like, there is a huge difference. It's kind of like there is a huge difference. There is a huge difference between someone who is healthy versus someone who is diagnosable, but it's also a spectrum. You understand what I'm saying? So, for instance, I am overweight. I am trying to get in shape, trying to get healthy, but I do not have diabetes. So the spectrum isn't, oh, you're overweight, so that means you have diabetes. No, I don't have anything diagnosable. However, I'm taking certain preventative measures to make sure that I don't increase the likelihood of me developing this physical issue. The same thing happens. And trauma is the number one, I want to say the number one risk factor for the development of a mental health issue, right? And I think also the number one protective factor is actually having a close relationship with another individual. And I think that that's extremely important for us to note too. So with all of that having been said, it's important for us to note that even though we could be experiencing the impact of trauma, that doesn't mean that we have PTSD. But just because we don't have PTSD doesn't mean we need to minimize what it is that we're going through. And it doesn't mean that we don't need to see a therapist. So I think a number of things can be true. We talk about nuance here all the time. So at some point, it is important for us to see a professional. And seeking a professional, I'm going to say this now, folks, especially for people of color, it's really like finding a good hairdresser. It's like finding a good hairdresser. For a man, it's like finding a good barber. And for people of color, it's like finding a good hairdresser in the suburbs. That's like you it's finding somebody who can put those bundles in the suburbs, who know how to lay the edges in the suburbs. All right? Just because it doesn't mean you give up on it, right? It doesn't mean, because you're not going to walk around raggedy head. You're not. Or you're going to do enough self-work to the best of your ability until you find that individual. It's the same thing. Dudes, you get a shape up, your hairline looking all asymmetrical and stuff. You're going to go to another barber, but you're not just going to be like, I'm done. So please continuously give it a try. Give it a shot. Yeah, and there's other things like mindfulness apps and stuff like that you could download.
Right. That reminds me, I wanted to say one thing. If you are a reader, books. Books, if you're not a reader, then you can do YouTube videos. You can YouTube a lot of stuff. YouTube University is like amazing. But I know for me, books is very helpful. And I kind of just look for books under the subjects of whatever it is I'm trying to figure out. And I read them, and I apply what's applicable and what's not. I might hold for someone else. But if you have a friend that's going through something in the area of grief, and you can find a book, read a book. It might not help you to understand everything, but it may give you some idea of how to support them. And if you're going through it yourself, until you find that therapist, look for resources to help you process on your own.
Yeah. So I think that's enough, and I agree with this one. I think we're cool. Definitely have a tribe that you could check in with, right? So with that having been said, folks, in light of everything that's going on, you should have an immediate self-care plan when things are going on in the world. You should have, as Christians, there are snatch verses. There are people where you could just send out when we're dealing with all kinds of losses, be it relational, be it, physical, be it, all the various type of losses, identity losses that we can go through in life. It is important that you have a tribe that you can reach out to. It is important that you know how you respond naturally, that you know what's going on with your body, and that you look up practices to really help you. Just look up some mindfulness practices. They can really help regulate a lot. So again, thank you. And with that having been said, Sarah, is there anything else that you wanted to say to us? Thank you for coming. Sarah, Lord willing, will be back, folks. Sarah will be back making more commentary on our white brothers and sisters, hopefully. But
just thank you for having me. It was a pleasure being with both of you. And I learned things listening to both of you. So I have my own takeaways from time. I was even thinking, wow, there are some things that I've said that were not great things to say. So, and I think that's important, like that we always need to be humble and teachable. As a therapist, I think sometimes there can be this pressure, like you should know all the answers and never like take a misstep, but that's incredibly erroneous. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, because when you asked for the third point about neuroplasticity, I went automatically to that. I don't remember, because the one I remembered was exercise, and that was it. And I was like, okay, exercise, and you said that one first. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. And then when you said it, I was like, dang, man. So yeah, folks, we're in the tribe. We're in the tribe together. And again, thank you all for coming out. And as we say, as per usual, love God, love your neighbor, and take care of yourself. Peace. You gotta throw up the deuces, Sarah.